I enjoyed the film. I think maybe suffered a little bit from being so hyped before it was released. You know, there was already, you know, come from Sundance, you know, with trailing showers of glory, or whatever the expression is, behind it. And so when I finally saw it, you know, I think I was always going to be a little disappointed. It's a very slight film, but actually it has stayed with me. And I think that, you know, it may not be the most cutting edge and intense analysis of a political leader or the formation of a political leader ever made, but it does have something to say about South America and about the formation of this young man, and it's a very subtle coming-of-age story, actually, and I found it kind of obscurely moving at the end, even though you didn't really quite know why, and that's always an achievement if you know they haven't hit you over the head with the mechanism of the movie. So yeah, I enjoyed it. It's you know, it's a little bit Marxism light. And, you know, there are criticisms.
Marxism with half the calories.
I know a lot of people I don't know that much about Che, but I know, you know, some critics criticised it for not mentioning his sort of the ferocious violence that he also embodied.
What did you think of the acting, the two leads in particular?
I thought they were fantastic. I think from the very beginning of the film, I was completely on the journey with them, and I thought that he set out the relationship between the two of them, and also there was something about that scene of the family, on the edge of the sidewalk saying goodbye to them, that I really cared about the family, and I cared about, these two youngsters.
It wasn't overly heroic, so that was what was good about it, actually, wasn't it?
And
the way they
sketched
those in, yes. Well, the father, you immediately believed they had this sort of relationship, the mother, the sisters, and yet no time wasted.
No, it's brilliant.
But that was what was best about the film, I think, was the lightness of touch, and then the bits that didn't work were the bits, as you say, these heavy-handed political bits.
I didn't find it that heavy-handed at all. I felt, I don't know that much about Che's early life either, and I thought that it was a very innocent look into, it was almost like an everyman tale of, everyone's awakening into a journey from the internal into a greater consciousness of social injustices. And you're right, you don't see that many films kind of exhibiting that these days, and so delicately.
He wasn't an everyman, was he? And in some ways the film is trying to play two games. It's trying to say, yes, this is an average rites of passage movie that so many people can identify with. But there again, he's an icon who ended up on people's student hall walls.
It is a sort of movie that stays with you, I think, more than you expect. Did you not find that? Because I was watching and thinking, at times, this is a bit Hollywood for my taste, for a film of this nature. The scene when he swims across the lake to be with those who need him more, I guess, or to show where his future and his heart lies. I thought that was a little heavy-handed, but afterwards, I did like the movie, and I found it stayed with me, so...
I think that, I had the same experience. That there were sorts of things I didn't like about it when I was watching it, but afterwards it felt rather a beguiling movie. I felt that something rather mysterious had happened. It's the most exquisitely beautiful film. I think everyone kind of agrees on that, with cinematography by Chris Doyle, the legendary Chris Doyle. It's easily Zhang Yimou's most successful film. I believe it's the most successful Chinese film ever made, and unlike House of Flying Daggers, which came after it, the Chinese really liked it, so it did very well in China. It's the story of the first emperor, really, the king who unites China in, I think, the 3rd century BC, and various assassins who are sent to finish him off, and how he deals with these assassins. There have been versions of this sort of a story before, but this is easily the best known and the most effective.
Visually stunning, as you said. I think we do all agree on that. What about the story itself, Kevin? Did it hook you in? Did you like what Zhang had to say?
Not really. I thought it was a bit boring in terms of the story. I mean, after about 20 minutes in the cinema, I was tapping my toes a little bit. I think it's incredibly beautiful. And just before we started doing this, we were looking at some trailers to all these films, and the trailer is extraordinary. And it looks like a great perfume commercial or something like that. I mean, it's lush and rich and kind of, visually surprising. But for me, that's not really enough. And I didn't have any human involvement in it, and the actors are very kind of wooden and maybe you're not meant to have any kind of involvement. I don't know, but for me, that kind of formality to it was just a bit of a turn-off.
It's a real departure from Zhang's earlier movies. I mean, I think most people, if they had to name a film, they would say Raising the Red Lantern. That would be the film they think of. Is this a conscious effort? Do you think this is a case of someone deliberately pandering to a Western audience, or deliberately making a movie which they know have enough of the vital components to be a breakthrough hit, but not losing too much of their style? I mean, do we need to cut him some slack?
Well, I think it's no secret that he looked rather enviously on the success of Crouching Tiger and thought, I want a piece of that, and that's what he's done. He has been accused of dumbing down in some ways. I mean, this film does not have the breadth and humanity of his earlier films. There's just no getting around that. I mean, he's also been accused of rather pandering to the Chinese government, because this is very much a film about unification and the need to get rid of personal desire and to conform to the desires of the whole. And this is very much a different man from the man who was always having his films banned by the Chinese. And now we have Zhang Yimou actually hired by the Chinese government to do their Olympics ceremonials. So he's now very much part of the establishment.
Well, God help us, because that will go on for hours, won't it? Gillian, we were talking about the lack of humanity, perhaps, in the film here. Did you like the movie? Did it work for you?
No, it didn't really hold me either. I felt, of course, it's absolutely stunning, and the colours and the cinematography is exquisite. But I once again didn't know anything about the characters. It was nothing to hold me in that respect either, which is so different from his other films. Such fantastic character pieces, and you really, get into the blood, sweat, and tears of his characters, and there was just none of that in this film at all. And it is possible to make a film where it can be as stunning, and you can have fight scenes, and you can have all of that, and people suspended in midair for hours on end, and yet care about the character. I love Almodovar, and I've always loved his films. I think that that Talk to Her was probably my favourite of all of his films. I felt like he really kind of hit his stride with that film. It was beautiful and mature, and I felt like it really came together. And I almost feel like Bad Education was kind of a step backwards for him. It was so dramatic and so serious, and the music, and you kept expecting something to actually be taking place, but there didn't seem to really be very much drama underneath, and I didn't really at any point care very much about the characters enough that when the story started to unravel and the layers started to unfold, I didn't really care what I was finding out.
People see his last two films as distinguished, mature works, and this is almost like Almodovar being naughty again. It's almost like he's not supposed to do this. He's grown up now. And he's gone back to all these sort of hot colours and hot palettes.
So like Law of Desire?
Exactly like Law of Desire. In fact, it's almost set in the same period he made Law of Desire. And I like the fact that he's sort of being misbehaved again.
I just think it's confused. To me, it just has too much going on, too many things thrown in there, too many references to Hitchcock in particular. And yet, there are moments, there are sequences within it which are fantastic and which are brilliant. But I would agree ultimately with Gillian, by the end you just don't really care, and you're not quite sure whether you're meant to be taking these characters in a kind of ironic way, or whether you're meant to be involved with them. And I think that's what he'd managed to achieve in his previous two films, was that for the first time, maybe ever, you actually really emotionally engaged in those films with the characters, that you got beyond the vulgarities and the irony. And in this one, I think, in that respect, it's a step back.
Do you think it's clear to work out what he's saying exactly about the subject, what he feels about it as a filmmaker? And do you think that subject benefits from being treated in what we've discussed as being the kind of trademark Almodovar style?
Yeah, no, I think that is very interesting, because it's a very controversial subject, and his treatment of it is extremely controversial. I'm surprised that the film didn't cause more furore than...
What do you think that he is saying?
Because he seems to be saying that all instances of paedophilia actually, maybe it's sometimes the kid who's at fault. And
well, not at fault. Maybe sometimes it's not necessarily an act of abuse.
It's not an act of abuse, it's an act of mutual desire.
Or rite of passage, really.
Exactly. And that seems to fit very clearly with his other films.
And his life, as much as we know about it.
And his life, what we know about it, yeah, absolutely. So, no, I mean, I think it's, he's a genuine auteur, to use that terrible word, and everything sort of his whole oeuvre feels of a piece, in a way. And so, and I think... There's great sequences in it where you just feel good. there's a great distinctive filmmaker working in just the way he does those things. I love those bits because those are the bits that make you really feel, you know, this guy's got a genuine way of genuinely different way of looking at the world.
For me, the Moon River sequence, I mean, my jaw dropped. I mean,
which sequence?
When the kid is singing Moon River to the priest.
It is so bizarre.
I did like it. I thought it was beautiful. His widescreen shots were just stunning, and I appreciated the complexity of the characters. It was a very complex balance, I thought, between the kids and their relationship with the father coming back after not seeing them for years, and that kind of mixture of pleasure and yearning, and yet anger and misery. I was a bit confused by a few things. I thought that the younger boy at the beginning seemed to be such a, you know, he was presented in the film as being so, for lack of a better word, weak, you know, and then all of a sudden, as soon as the father comes on the scene, he's this angry young man. But I thought that overall that it was the complexity of the relationship between all the three characters that kind of pulled me through the film. But what really kind of pulled the film together for me were the stills at the end. First of all, they were extraordinarily beautiful. And second of all, and I haven't read anything about the film, so I don't know whether this was his intention, but the stills showed an adventure that all the characters that were captured were having this remarkable time. That you see, like, the crack of a smile, you see these beautiful vistas behind them, and it actually looks like a documentation of a great family trip, and yet the journey there was an absolute mess, miserable for everybody involved.
So a very clever final move.
Yeah, and was that, I don't know whether that was his intention or whether it's some statement about how we remember things, you know.
There's something strangely
life.
touching about those stills at the end, isn't there? I thought that as
Really
well. I couldn't quite
touching.
put my finger on what it was. But
I think it made it feel more real, didn't it? It made it feel like what you'd seen had been more.
I think Gillian's also right that I hadn't
Yeah.
really thought of that, but actually the perspective you suddenly shifts on the whole story.
I felt like I
they-
liked the thing as a whole
Yeah.
a lot more because of those stills at the end.
Was there enough on screen involving the father for you to believe his relationship with the son? Did you want to know more about where he'd come from, why he'd come back, why he'd left in the first place? Because that's left very open, isn't it?
I quite like that about it. It does give such a sense of menace, particularly the moments when the father is, you know, on the verge of violence or whatever, and you suddenly think, well, is he really even their father? As indeed the boys every now and again ask themselves. I like the fact that it was, you know, very mysterious. There was such a sort of sense of doom about the movie, and just things being very, very slightly awry. And I think if it had been a little bit too literal about the father and why he left, and the mother too was such a sort of weird cipher figure, just this sort of endlessly enveloping, nurturing mother who is either hugging him or cooking him a meal.
I love the film, and as I said at the end, I felt really strangely moved by it, and these stills in particular, and I think that probably did have something to do with the fact that we all know that the young actor died, and that somehow seems so appropriate, and the whole to the themes of the movie, that he drowned. Unlike Gillian, actually thought that the anger and resentment felt by this little boy towards his father, about the yearning to be loved and the yearning to have his father pay attention to him, that sort of conflict within him was really strong, actually, and I find that very, this may be betraying something about my own family background, but I find that very, very touching. It's the story of a kind of odd couple relationship between the sophisticated city photographer and his cousin from the country, his country bumpkin cousin who comes to stay looking for a job and doesn't really find a job, and the way they don't, you know, how they rub along together, these two. It's very slow. It's something I think you probably have to see at the cinema. I'm not sure how it would work on the small screen because you need to sink into the rhythm of it. It's that kind of movie where you need to get into its pace. You can't bring your own life into it, I think. But I'd highly, highly recommend it, and I think maybe out of all of these films, it's the most perfectly realised. The tone of it is just beautiful all the way through. It doesn't put a foot wrong. The
director does. You really get the sense the director knows exactly what he wants from it. And earlier on you mentioned the dreaded A word, auteur. Nuri Bilge Ceylan, as I'm informed his name was, he was the writer, the director, the cinematographer and the producer. So certainly here's someone who is pretty much hands-on, and they shot it in his flat as if there were enough. And I believe they used his car. And his cousin. So really, it's a real kind of like...
It's a family affair. That's great. Is he a sort of star in Turkey?
I don't know. No, I think the cousin hadn't acted before, I don't believe. And I think the lead guy in it also was a non-actor before this movie. So now, does that make it easier to make the film, do you think? A film which is kind of like as low-key and as deadpan as this, or would that be harder? Let's ask Gillian.
Once again, with this film, I have to say that I didn't really care very much about the characters. For some reason, I don't know whether this was that I saw on a small screen and not a big screen, but it seems that you never actually see the full facial features of the main character for a good long way into the film, and so I'm not quite sure whether it was just hidden or it was dark or something for a long time, and I didn't actually really feel like I saw him, and therefore I didn't really see who he was or what he was about until well into the film. And the way that he stalked women, you know, the way that he observed them endlessly and rubbed up against them on train, I swear, it creeped me out so much that I couldn't actually
really... But he's
really...
a quiet, desperate man.
Yeah.
That's what we do.
And speaking as three quiet, desperate men, we can assure you that goes on.
I love this film. It's beautifully spare, it's sort of bone-white, dry. It's a very, very austere film and requires a certain amount of dedication from the viewer, but I think it just rewards you in huge amounts. Yes, I mean, Istanbul looks amazing. We see Istanbul on the snow. There's that amazing shot when he's walking past a sort of drowned tanker, you know, which is the most stunning shot, which comes out of nowhere. And it just looks astonishing and very wintry, and we're not really sort of used to Turkey being a sort of wintry environment. And I just feel this is a story which could have taken place almost anywhere in Europe. It's a very European film. Yeah. You know, I can imagine this happening in, you know, Italy or East Europe and anywhere. It's a very sophisticated cosmopolitan film.
Roger, you're a fan as well.
I'm a big fan, and he's such a massive figure in Japan. I mean, he's a sort of completely... He writes, he makes music, he writes newspaper columns, he does a big TV show, comedy TV show, and he makes these movies. And this, I understand, is the most successful movie he's ever made. It's a really, really big hit in Japan. I love it. It's sort of classic Kitano. He's a blind swordsman, stroke samurai. Not quite sure whether he's a samurai. And he sort of has a bit of a run-in with the sort of local gangsters in old Japan.
It's not a samurai movie in the traditional sense in any way, is it? Although I assume I don't think it's a samurai, but it's Edo period Japan, I think they're in. So
yes, Asano is a Ronin. He describes himself as a Ronin.
Which is a masterless samurai.
He's a masterless samurai. So we're never quite sure who Kitano's character is, but he's clearly a very sort of dangerous man. He's masquerading as a masseur when he comes into town. He stays with this farmer's wife.
Well, we've all done that.
Goes out gambling, and soon they begin to wonder who he is.
Did you find it, did it work for you on the level of it being a kind of action movie, or did you find it more of a kind of an oddity? Was it enjoyable in the sort of traditional sense?
No, I think it's a great action movie, and it's a little bit mad, and that's what makes it more interesting than your average sort of genre flick. I think it's a bit of a mad movie, and that's why I like it.
I'm not a fan of the genre, and it's like watching, you know, your umpteenth cowboy movie, really, isn't it? And it's the same things come back again and again, and you're either into that and, you know, love looking at how the little differences are between one director and another director, or you don't. And personally, I don't. I find it fun, but it didn't touch me.
It's not a life-changing experience.
It's not a life-changing
It doesn't have much to say about the human condition, I don't feel. For those reasons, I'm intrigued to see what Gillian made of it. Did you like it?
I did find it fun. I felt like the slapstick stuff just went a little bit too far. That guy running around in his diaper, sorry, you know, trying to be a samurai. It just took it a bit too far, and also the odd one out, because the rhythmic peasants dancing in the field, I just couldn't. And possibly it reminded me too much of Dance in the Dark, that kind of rhythm, which had such a profound impact on me, that I couldn't tell whether it was a homage to or a copying of or what, and it kind of disrupted the film for me, because it took me so far out of what the storyline was, and I couldn't quite figure out whether it was a scene transition or a filler, or whether, you know, I didn't know.
The film has been described as the Japanese version of Clint Eastwood doing The Lone Ranger. I mean, that's the equivalent.
Yeah.
And so there is a slightly tongue-in-cheek element here. And so, you know, for me, I'm not too thrown out when something a bit odd happens.
Fascinating character, though, that blind man. And the stillness, you know, he'd do his whoosh, and then there'd be this pause as he kind of regained his composure again.